good to have you all back. We have a different room, so I have to get used to the acoustics. Can you hear me okay? Kind of echoing? All right, it's different though. You know, you can't hear?
There's an echo.
There's an echo. I know. People in front seem to be better off, I think, so if you want to move around a little bit, you can, welcome to come up. There's not much I can do about it. I know there's a lot of noise coming out of the ventilator. But we all fit. That's good. No couches, I apologize. So how many people here are doing the plant-based diet now? Wow, excellent. That's great. Well, we're going to definitely talk about that. And has anybody actually looked at any of the videos online that I've been posting? Anybody using that or suggesting it to people? If you go to our website now, you know the RAV's website, which is rochesterveg.org, and you click on course resources, which is at the top. It'll take you to a page that is pretty self-explanatory. You can get all the handouts in PDF form, and you can also click on view the video for the class. And I think I have 3. I think I have 1, 2, and 4 up. Yeah. Okay, I'm still working on 3, but it'll be there. You go to rochesterveg.org, and then at the top of the page you look for course resources. Now, because we have an older website, sometimes the word course resource, the term is hidden. You might have to move your mouse around or widen your screen. It's usually there, but on my computer it's only there half the time. So we're thinking about moving our website to another. That's a whole other story. So much technology, right? So anyway, welcome back everybody. And tonight we're going to be talking about protein myths. And we're going to try to do this with my iPhone again. Here we go. So really, what's the first question you always get? Where do you get your protein, right? And have you been more successful in answering that question now? Yeah? Plants, exactly, right. Just like an elephant, just like a gorilla, just like a cow. So we started talking about reductionism the first lecture actually, and we're going to talk about it a lot next week. But do you remember when we talked about the cow jumping over the moon? And we had to kind of make a lot of assumptions, like the cow isn't really shaped like a cow, it's shaped like a sphere. Otherwise we can't do the calculations. So when it comes to food, we tend to do a lot of reductionism also. We say food is just composed of 3 things, right? Carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And then we just sort of make this assumption, well, let's assume that they're 4, 4, and 9 in terms of calories per gram. And then, and from there, then we kind of make all these calculations. Like people say, well, what percentage of your calories should come from protein and what should come from fat? But nobody ever says, gee, how much of your phytonutrients should come from, kale, right? Which is really, in a lot of ways, a more important question. But because we have knowledge about these things, and it's just sort of the way our minds work, we say, well, we know about these things. Let's figure it out based on what we think we know about that. So Colin Campbell in his book Whole, which is a really great book that I highly recommend. Colin Campbell is the one who wrote the China study. And this is his latest book, Whole. Actually, his latest book is called The Low-Carb Fraud, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It's only available online at the moment. But basically, he bemoans the fact that we move forward in science solely by reductionism. Now, we need to do that because when we do experiments, we need to control for all the factors, right? The problem is when you're talking about nutrition is so complicated that if you try to reduce it to a few things, you leave out all these other things, and you just tend to mess it up. So we're going to talk about that at length next week. So anybody remember what that bird is? I told you last time. That's a, what is that? That's an American tree sparrow. That's in my backyard. That's a green heron. That's in Florida. So tonight we're talking about protein, and of course we can't talk about protein without talking about low-carb diets. And when you're talking about low-carb diet, you're talking about high-fat, high-protein, right? I can read this in my last. So who's the most famous low-carb guy? Right? Robert Atkins. People like to make a lot of the fact that he died of heart disease. And it's actually not really necessarily fair. His widow got pretty upset about it because he died of cardiomyopathy, not necessarily from coronary artery disease. It's not clear what he died from. And the fact that he was so overweight was because he spent 2 weeks in the ICU afterwards and he gained like 60 pounds before he died, just in fluid. So anyway, it seems like a nice guy. I don't think he was evil. I think his diet is totally misguided. And what was that diet? Well, it's eat all the fatty animal foods you want. And so full-fat dairy, cheese, red meat, bacon, etc. and limit your carbohydrates to 20 to 40 grams per day. Well, if we do the calculation, what is that? That's 80 to 160 calories, right? Which is what percent of your calories from carbohydrate, if you're going to do that one? Yeah, it's about 4 to 8%, right? Because out of 2,000 calories, you're basically getting 4 to 8% of your calories from carbohydrates, which is very little. We're telling you should be getting 70%, 75%, maybe even 80% of your calories from carbohydrates. Certainly that's if you're on a whole food plant-based diet. And why does it work? Well, because the body goes into it goes into starvation mode. And since it doesn't have any glucose to work with, it starts metabolizing these things called ketones, and it goes into what's called ketosis, and that makes you burn fat. And in fact, that's why you actually do lose weight, in part because the only thing you can burn is this fat. Now, it's also true that if you look at what people actually eat who are on the Atkins diet, they feel so lousy that they're actually not taking in that many calories. If you actually look at how many calories you're taking in, it just isn't that many. So it may actually be the calories in, calories out theory at work here, although there may, people argue about whether that's strictly correct in terms of calories in, calories out. Gary Taubes, people heard of Gary Taubes? Okay, we're going to talk about him in a minute. So anyway, that's the Atkins low-carb diet. Then that was out of 1972, the Dr. Atkins diet revolution. Then other people have come along. There's Barry Sears, who's he's still alive. He was a researcher at MIT, but now he's kind of got this zone diet thing going, and he actually makes quite a bit of money on his books and his programs. He came in 1995. He came out with the zone. Well, how does the zone work? Well, it's in terms of carbohydrate to protein to fat, it's 40, 30, 30. So it's a little higher in carbohydrate, right, than Atkins, but it's still relative to what we're telling you, it's still quite a bit lower. And a lot of protein and fat. And the problem is, to get that much protein and fat in your diet, it's going to be pretty much exclusively animal products. And that's really, maybe that's actually the problem, is that these diets are just so high in animal products, because I'm going to show you later on that the health outcomes from these is not good. You will lose weight, or a lot of people lose weight, and they swear by it. He has this thing that he calls the hormonal paradox, which has to do with balancing insulin and glucagon. That it helps, in their mind, it helps the ratio of glucagon to insulin. Remember, insulin lowers your blood sugar by pushing glucose into your cells. Glucagon raises your blood sugar by turning the glycogen that's stored in your muscles and liver into glucose that you can then burn. So that's where he was talking about this hormonal paradox. And anyway, that's called getting into the zone. So you'll hear people say about they're getting into the zone. In fact, what's interesting is there's a number of terms that actually come from the low-carb craze. Maybe I shouldn't use the term craze. That's not fair to people who are on that diet. But carb, just the term carb as an abbreviation for carbohydrate, kind of comes from that movement. So when people say, "Oh, I can't, that's too many carbs," that's where they're getting it from, even if they don't necessarily realize it. So that's the zone diet. That's Barry Sears. Then there's Arthur Agatston, who is actually a cardiologist, and he came up with something called the South Beach diet. He's still alive, and he basically says avoid bad fats and bad carbs. I actually don't understand the diet that well, other than that it's one of the low-carb diets. He's actually pretty well known, believe it or not, among radiologists, because he came up with this thing called the coronary artery calcium scoring, which is a way of non-invasively measuring the plaque in your arteries in your heart by doing a CAT scan. And a lot of places do that as a screening study. It's a way of generating income. And supposedly it can tell you what your risk for heart disease is, but I think it's kind of a crude test. Anyway, so his is they encourage lots of veggies and fibers, so that's good. They consider it a modified low carbohydrate diet. They emphasize low glycemic index foods. Have people heard about the glycemic index? I don't have a whole lot of time to talk about that right now, but basically the glycemic index rates food on a scale that tells you how quickly the sugar in that food ends up in your bloodstream. So table sugar is very high on the glycemic index. Carrots are actually relatively high, believe it or not. Potatoes are relatively high. Some of the lower things are like brown rice. White rice would be high, brown rice would be low. Actually, pasta is relatively low, believe it or not, if it's cooked al dente. So it all depends on how you cook it. Then there's also something that Neil Barnett likes to talk about, which is glycemic load. So even food that has a fairly high glycemic index well, maybe it doesn't have that much sugar in it anyway. The sugar in it ends up in your bloodstream pretty quickly, but like carrots, it's hard to believe they're so bad, right? They're high in, well, it turns out they don't have a lot of sugar. That sugar ends up in your bloodstream pretty quickly, but it's not a big glycemic load. So it's one of these things that maybe in the reductionist world you want to worry about, but in our world where we're just trying to eat whole foods, you don't have to think about it too much, because it's hard to believe that carrots are bad food, right? It does tend to be lower in carbohydrates and higher in protein and healthy fats than the standard American diet. And again, it's not a strict low-carb diet. And there's no carb counting. So what about the paleo diet? People have heard of that, right? So paleo is also considered a low-carb diet. And what's the rationale? Well, people say, well, you know, our current diet has only been around for less than 10,000 years, but our bodies are still adapted to a diet that we, evolved to consume over millions of years. And there's a number of variants, but they all share the following features. They're very high in animal food and non-starchy vegetables. There we go. They're going to close us out. Steve, I tried. They exclude things that weren't available before agriculture. So dairy is excluded from paleo diet, grains, believe it or not, legumes, potatoes, because they were in South America, I guess, refined sugar, processed oils, refined salt. So in some ways that's good, right? But it typically gets huge amounts of their calories from animal products. So fish, grass-fed, pasture-raised meats, eggs, vegetables, fruit, fungi, roots, and nuts. And as you might expect, there's an industry around it. And these are a number of the books you can buy for the paleo diet. And if you go to their website, you can become a member. You can purchase all these things at the Paleo store. Paleo diet is endorsed, the Paleo cookbook. So, in other words, it's one of these things, maybe it's right, maybe it's not right, but you have to be suspicious because people are making a fair amount of money off this, and a lot of people are invested in it. So if they suddenly found out something bad about the paleo diet, they probably wouldn't tell you, right? Because they're already kind of invested. So what does Colin Campbell, our hero, say about the paleo diet? Well, he says, I agree that humans must have consumed some amount of animal-based food during their evolutionary past, but I don't agree that we should use highly questionable evidence from ancient history to vigorously assert the correct amounts of protein and fat to be consumed in the present day when we have access to far superior research methodologies and experimentation. So in other words, it's conjecture. First of all, we don't really know what those people were eating a million years ago or 50,000 years ago. We try to use modern hunter-gatherers as examples, but it's really hard to know whether they're all good examples of what people used to be like before, the last ice age, because they've all been exposed to Western culture, and only certain ones of those have survived. So it's really hard to figure it out. There's some estimates that maybe 5% of the calories in cavemen came from animal products. That's kind of what chimpanzees are kind of like that. Chimps are basically vegan. Gorillas are completely vegan. Chimps are basically vegan, but they will eat ants and grubs and stuff like that. And there's some actual groups of chimps that will actually actively hunt monkeys. So there is some tendency there. Weston Price, have anyone heard of Weston Price? Okay, so Weston Price, actually, he was a dentist. And he was born in Canada, but he moved to Cleveland. Dental researcher, and he came up with some theories about dentition and why is it that people from less developed cultures have such good teeth. At least he thought they had good teeth. And he went around taking x-rays. He actually had one of the first x-ray machines. And now there's something called the Weston Price Foundation, which has really no connection to Weston Price, because he died in 1948, and the Weston Price Foundation was founded in 1999. And they're all about animal products, eating as much butter, fat, bacon, organ meat as you can get your hands on. And their recommendations include consumption of unprocessed or minimally processed food, including traditional fats, animal fats, dairy fats, olive oil, cod liver oil, organic fruits and vegetables, that's good. Raw dairy products, that's crazy. Soured or lacto-fermented dairy and vegetables, such as sauerkraut, whole grains, soaked or soured to neutralize the phytic acid, and bone stock. So they're really into raw dairy. They actually have some lawsuits going on around the country to keep the government out of dairy, right, so that people can consume raw dairy, which will then mean that people are going to start coming down with bovine tuberculosis and all these other things that we got rid of by pasteurizing milk. but we shouldn't be drinking milk anyway, so that's all right. They also recommend consumption of saturated fats and cholesterol. That's a really good thing in their view. And if you go to their website, it's pretty amazing. They're going to tell you exactly the opposite of what we're going to tell you here. So who's right?
Was that based on what he was about? I thought you said he was...
Yeah, actually, it's not really clear what he was about. So the question is, was that something he advocated? It's not really clear from his writings what exactly he advocated.
So where did they
why did they get it? I think you can interpret some of his writings as saying that, but I'm not really sure. It's true. It's a good question. I didn't really have time to look that up.
Do they have any evidence?
Do they have any evidence?
They can say anything they want.
They can say anything they want.
Do they back it up?
They don't have any there's no scientific evidence, and that's what Colin Campbell will tell you, that people who write these books, who have these organizations, they don't have to publish in peer-reviewed journals. And so they don't have to justify what they're saying. They probably can find some article somewhere that they use to, as quote, prove their point. I honestly don't know what it is they use. So Gary Taubes actually is a pretty famous journalist now. People heard of him? So if you read the New York Times, he had a big article in the New York Times Magazine a couple of years ago. Carol, what was that called? Anyway, his book is called what? Good calories.
That's why we get fat.
Why we get fat. He's all about obesity, and he gets interviewed on TV a lot. He's been on Dr. Oz, and he believes in low carb. He thinks that the diet that the reason that we have the obesity epidemic is because of all the carbs, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So he's written for Science Magazine, which is great, New York Times, Scientific American, lots of other places. He actually started out writing about, he's really into scientific fraud, which is good. I think that's a great thing. And kind of needling scientists. So he got really, remember cold fusion? So he really went after the guys who were talking about cold fusion, which turned out to be, didn't really work, right? If it did, we wouldn't be worrying about fracking. So he didn't get famous doing that because nobody really cared. So he decided to go after food. And that's how he got famous, because everyone's interested in food. And he believes that the obesity epidemic is due to carbs. And he espouses a low-carb diet. And does he actually eat a low-carb diet? Well, this is apparently what he eats. I do indeed eat 3 eggs with cheese, bacon, and sausage for breakfast every morning, typically a couple of cheeseburgers without a bun, or a roast chicken for lunch, and more often than not, a ribeye or New York steak, grass-fed, for dinner, usually in the neighborhood of a pound of meat. I cook with butter and occasionally olive oil for the sausages. My snacks run to cheese and almonds, so lots of fat and saturated fat and very little carbohydrates. He apparently is married and has a couple of kids, and his wife doesn't necessarily agree with this. So, if you're interested in reading more about that, I'm sure you can find out more. So what does Colin Campbell have to say about Gary Taubes? Well, to say that the government-recommended low-fat diet adopted during the past 4 decades has only led to more obesity is hubris squared. Even if the American public had followed the recommendations and reduced their dietary fat, and the most one could say in that case was that dietary fat was reduced from about 35 to 33% of total calories, that cannot be used to properly evaluate the health benefits of a truly low-fat diet like the WFPB diet, in which only 10 to 12% of calories come from fat. So in other words, Gary Taubes' argument is that, look, we've been telling people since 1970 to cut the fat out of the diet, you go on a low-fat diet, and all they've done is get fat. Well, that doesn't hold much water if, in fact, they didn't really do it, right? Telling people to do something and then them not doing it, but then saying it's because we told them, they didn't really do it. So how can you blame that? Plus, even if they had, they've only come down to, the average American has really gone from 35 to 33% calories from fat. We're telling you should be getting, 10 to 15 to 20% calories from fat. So they're not even there. And what's interesting is one of the reasons that Americans' fat consumption actually went down a little bit is mainly because they're eating more refined carbohydrates. So they're actually eating more calories. So as a percentage of calories, fat went down, but actual fat intake didn't really change. It's about the same. It's just there's more carbohydrates going in. I don't want to use the term carb. So, for example, it has long been established that when diet and disease correlations for different populations are compared, as in cross-sectional studies, diets rich in fat and animal protein, like the Paleo diet, correlate strongly with higher rates of heart disease and cancers of the breast, colon, and prostate, to name only a few. So, although I mentioned cross-sectional correlation studies, I'm not inferring specific causality from these correlations. I'm only saying that this is long established, indisputable relationship The high ratio of animal to plant foods expressed in various ways categorically refutes the main tenet of the paleo/low-carb advocates. By the way, do you see why Colin Campbell, some people kind of fall asleep when they read what he writes? Right? Huh? Sorry? He's very articulate, yeah. But the average American who doesn't listen to NPR, who's really wants to get their news in like 10-second bites, they're not listening to this. Whereas they love to hear things about paleo, low carb, good things about your bad habits, right? So, and then he goes on, I know of no studies, for example, showing that a paleo low-carb diet is associated with lower rates of these and other related Western diseases. There is absolutely no wiggle room here. There's just nothing that he feels contradicts that. Another profound effect, now this is Cordain is a guy who advocates paleo. And other low-carb advocates ignore concerns the substantial health benefits that are quickly observed when people adopt a whole foods plant-based diet. When switching to the whole food plant-based diet from the current American diet, which is only marginally less high in fat and protein than the paleo low-carb diet, the health benefits are broad, surprisingly rapid, and relatively free of side effects. So people have seen Forks Over Knives. Remember how quickly those people get better? And you also know how quickly people get sick if you've seen that movie with Super Size Me, right? That guy just got really sick in less than a month. I know of no evidence yet produced showing that the paleo low-carb diet can do this, marking a truly striking difference between the paleo low-carb diet and the WFPB diet. In other words, you wouldn't take somebody who's basically pretty sick and say, you know what, you need to be living on bacon and butter. It just wouldn't be, would be malpractice. In general, when following the WFPB diet, serious illnesses like heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers, including cancer of the liver and pancreas and melanoma, and autoimmune diseases are not only prevented, but more importantly, can be intercepted in their forward progress and even reversed, as reviewed in the China study. The evidence on treating these diseases has been published in peer-reviewed professional journals, and I'm confident that in the near future, these same benefits will be shown for a broad spectrum of additional disease conditions. So actually, he mentions melanoma up there because he has personal experience with that. If you read the book whole, he talks about how he takes his best friend to the doctor because she has this melanoma. Well, it turns out, or this spot on her skin. It turns out his best friend is his wife. She has this biopsy. She has a malignant melanoma. And this was, I forget how many years ago, but they decided not to treat it. So basically, she's been fine. They think she probably got it long before they went on the whole food plant-based diet, and it's been just sitting there because she's noticed it for a long time. And so if you understand what he talks about, which is that, cancer, there's cancer initiation, but there's also cancer promotion. If you've got a little cancer and it's not getting a diet that promotes it, it'll just sit there. It's not going to grow. Now that's a little scary for those of us, in the conventional medicine because, we think you have to get pretty aggressive with these things. And until we do some more studies, it's going to be hard to really prove it. But she hasn't had anything done. She's really fine. And it's been a couple of years since they found it. So, the evidence is remarkably consistent. When eating the WFPB diet, a diet that is exactly the opposite of the paleo diet, the benefits begin quickly, slowing, and often reversing a broad spectrum of diseases and illnesses. So, has a paleo low-carb diet ever been shown to do this? No, not ever. And while more formal peer-reviewed research still needs to be done on the comprehensive effects of the WFPB diet, the experimental, observational, and clinical evidence provides a remarkable degree of consistency. This type of evidence profoundly trumps any theoretically mechanistic or archaeological evidence the paleo diet has to offer. So he's pretty skeptical, in case you didn't guess. But he does agree we need to have some more science, and the problem is it's just hard to get anyone to pay for those studies because there's not much money to be made. However, there's a pretty compelling argument, I think, that we already have enough evidence. And really the only downside to it, if you think about it, is cultural. It goes against the grain for a number of people. It also is hard on a lot of businesses. So the dairy industry is going to fight no matter what. They think we need the scientific studies because it hasn't been proven. And anybody else whose business is going to be hurt. But if it weren't for that, I don't think there'd be much reason to say, to argue with it. It's just that there's constituencies that will be harmed. So, however, we do have some studies. This is a study by Neil Barnard, our hero at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And it's a low-fat vegan diet and a conventional diabetes diet in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And it's a randomized controlled study, and it goes on pretty long. 74 weeks, it's a year and a half, right? So this is what we want, these kinds of studies. And what are the conclusions? So I won't tell you the conclusions, I'll tell you some more about the study. We compared the effects of a low-fat vegan diet and conventional diabetes diet, recommendations on glycemia, weight, and plasma lipids. So these were free-living individuals. Don't you love that term? So really, in order to really do a good scientific study in the reductionist mode, you have to put people in a building, right, and control everything that they get, and maybe vary a couple of things. But that's pretty hard to do with real humans, and even if you did a study like that, it wouldn't prove very much, because you can't get people to live like that. So they compared basically a low-fat vegan diet or a diet that follows the guidelines of the American Diabetes Association. And then they measured things like hemoglobin A1C. People are familiar with that. If you know somebody with diabetes, it's a measurement of what your average blood sugar has been over the last few months. Unlike measuring just blood sugar right now, which doesn't really tell you much because your blood sugar goes up and down a lot depending on what you just ate or didn't eat. But hemoglobin A1C is felt to be an accurate assessment of how well controlled your blood sugar is. So what did they find? Well, both diets were associated with sustained reductions in weight and plasma lipid concentrations. In an analysis controlling for medication changes, a low-fat vegan diet appeared to improve glycemia and plasma lipids more than did conventional diabetes diet recommendations. It actually worked better than the standard recommendation. With the last sentence referring to macro or microvascular complications, the study didn't go on long enough to find out whether this was going to help people's heart disease or their diabetic neuropathy, that type of thing. Although I was in this conference I was just at a couple of weeks ago in Florida, they talked about how diabetic neuropathy actually may be a vascular problem because the nerves to your feet have their own blood supply, right? And if the blood supply to your nerves is getting cut off, then that's why you get the neuropathy. You don't have to kind of imagine, well, there's just something else happening that's just restricted to nervous tissue. It's actually just another manifestation of vascular disease.
How compliant are the patients?
Sorry?
How compliant are the patients?
How compliant are the patients? That is a great question. So I'm glad you asked that, actually, because the people in the American Diabetic Association, they have to count calories and restrict. They basically have to restrict their servings. Right? Whereas the other people were told, eat all you want. This is a list of things that are acceptable. Eat all you want. And they actually lost more weight, those people. And were on a much better diet, right? I mean, there was lots of veggies. Anyway, and so that I think is more likely to be to demonstrate compliance in the long term. You know, certainly, I mean, we've been eating that way for a long time. Question? Yes.
Now, for the subjects that are randomized to low-fat diet,
Right.
it's more expensive.
For the subjects who are randomized to the low-fat diet, it's more expensive?
So, probably it's cheaper to eat McDonald's.
Oh, it's cheaper to eat junk food. That's true in a lot of ways.
So, I was just asking in terms of how many of them
Really stuck with
stick
it?
to it and how they find patients.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll talk about that later at the Q&A session because that's kind of a big topic, which I think is important. You know, how easy is it to get people to go on these diets? Well, so these are some. The low carb fraud is the one in the middle there. That just came out. It's actually only available as an ebook right now, but I've downloaded it, and that's where I got those quotes. And you know, you really need somebody like Colin Campbell to refute Gary Taubes, because Gary Taubes, if you've ever seen him, is extremely compelling in his demeanor and in his ability to quote facts from the literature. And you just wonder, you know, gosh, is everything I've been telling you guys, am I crazy or what? Because he seems so sane. So it's really helpful to have somebody like Colin Campbell making the arguments. And I think he probably is pretty sane in a lot of ways. It's just the carbophobia is over on the left. That's Michael Greger came out with that book quite a while ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago, and that's where the Atkins people sued him because of that. You're going to hear about that in a minute. And then the starch solution is John McDougall, you know, who's just been doing this forever, and he writes all these great bestsellers. So, highly recommend anything by John McDougall. So one way to think about the difference between complex carbohydrates and refined carbohydrates, and I got this analogy from Rip Esselstyn, Caldwell Esselstyn's son. So he talks about if you have a campfire, right, and you throw a piece of paper on, the fire, it's going to flare up. Well, that's bad, because basically what happens is you take in something that's very sugary, your blood glucose goes up really quickly, you get a flare, then your insulin responds because it says, wow, all this sugar's coming into my body, right? And then it drives your glucose down, and all of a sudden you're hypoglycemic because there's too much insulin for the amount of sugar that was actually available. And then you become hypoglycemic, and that's when people say, oh, I'm hypoglycemic, I need to eat these other foods, right? As opposed to complex carbohydrates, which equal to slow burn, right? Good, steady blood glucose levels. And here we go. This is what happens with the newspaper. But the hardwood, the good logs, right? They just keep burning. So you think of the complex carbohydrates as a good hardwood log that you throw on your fire. It stays, burns for a long time, as opposed to that piece of junk that you just, ate and it flares up and it's gone. You'll remember that, right? So we're going to turn this over to Michael Greger here in a minute. This is that article that I wrote with Neil Barnard a few years ago about a guy who actually was on the Atkins diet. And I'm very proud to say that Michael Greger actually did a little video of that.
Remember the Atkins diet? I wrote a book about it a few years ago. The Atkins Corporation threatened to sue me, but I kind of won by default because they declared bankruptcy 6 months later. You can read the whole book in my rather amusing back and forth with Atkins lawyers at atkinsexposed.org. Here's an illustrative case report of what can happen when you go on such a diet, reported recently in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association. Development of symptomatic cardiovascular disease after self-reported adherence to the Atkins diet. Started out healthy, 51-year-old man, pretty good cholesterol, no chest pain, and a working penis. He was gaining a few pounds, though, so he decided to go on a low-carb diet. 1 month in, his cholesterol shot through the roof, but hey, he lost 5 pounds, so he kept it up. And after 2 years, more on the diet, he lost 3 pounds, but he also lost the ability to have an erection, and he started having chest pains. But hey, that's what drugs are for, so he started taking Viagra, the wonders of modern medicine, which also came in handy when he landed in the emergency room with crushing chest pain. He got a cardiac catheterization, which found a 99% blockage of one of his coronary arteries, supplying blood to his heart. Luckily, they found it in time. He got a drug-eluting stent placed, was eventually discharged from the hospital, and finally decided, maybe this Atkins thing isn't such a great idea, so switched to a low-fat diet with whole grains, beans, vegetables, nuts, and even, gasp, the inclusion of vegetarian entrees. 2 months on the new diet, his weight was down, his cholesterol was down, and he stopped taking the Viagra. Now, a skeptic might suggest that he had clogged arteries before he even started the low-carb diet. But no, he actually got a coronary artery scan right before starting on Atkins, and there was no measurable plaque in his coronary arteries. And then just 29 months later, after the initiation of the low-carb diet, 99% blockage. Now, they were able to open that surgically with a stent, but it took his changing to a more healthy diet to open up blood flow to other parts of his body.
Thank you, Michael, for that. And I have another video from Michael as well.
This was a pretty dramatic case report, but it was just one person. Recently, researchers at Harvard decided to look at 100,000 people, low-carb diets, and all-cause and cause-specific mortality. They found that low-carb diets were associated with higher all-cause mortality, higher cardiovascular disease mortality, and higher cancer mortality, the final nail in Atkins' coffin. Men and women on low-carb diets live significantly shorter lives, more cancer deaths, more heart attacks. Sure, you may lose some weight, but the only way we may be able to enjoy it is with a skinnier casket. But wait, in 2009, some enterprising researchers came up with a plant-based low-carb diet, the so-called Eco-Atkins diet. They figured that maybe the problem with the Atkins diet wasn't that it was high-fat, high-protein, but that it was high animal fat, animal protein. So they constructed like a vegan version of the Atkins diet. Now, how is that possible? Well, lots of mock meat, seitan, soy burgers, veggie bacon, veggie cold cuts, veggie sausage, tofu, lots of nuts, avocado, etc. How did they do? Pretty good, actually. Instead of their bad cholesterol going up, like it does on a meat-based Atkins, after just 2 weeks on the plant-based low-carb diet, their LDL was down more than 20%. Now, the whole study only lasted a month, though, so you couldn't really make any generalizations, but it was intriguing enough that when the data was run at Harvard, they picked out the people eating plant-based low-carb diets to see if they suffered the same low-carb fate. That's the nice thing about doing dietary studies on 100,000 people at a time. You can find people eating just about anything. What do you think they found? This line represents the mortality rate of the typical diet, and this is what they found for people following more of an Atkins-style low-carb diet: significantly higher risk of death. But what do you think they found for those following a plant-based low-carb diet? Did they suffer the same crazy mortality as the Atkins people? Or maybe they didn't do that bad, but still had more mortality than those eating regular diets? Or did they have the same or lower mortality? They had lower mortality. They concluded, a low-carbohydrate diet based on animal sources was associated with higher all-cause mortality in both men and women, whereas a vegetable-based low-carbohydrate diet was associated with lower all-cause and cardiovascular disease mortality rates. So it appears what matters really isn't the ratio of fat to carbs to protein, but rather the source, whether they're coming from plants or animals.
So wouldn't it be great if I could give you a simpler answer about all this? Because if you think about what you just said, it's not so much the low-carb part of it that's the problem, it's the animal products part of it, at least in that particular study, but of course that was only 1 month. So we're actually going to look at that study in a little more detail. Here's the abstract. So, it's from the Annals of Internal Medicine 2010, and again that's from the Harvard School of Public Health. There's Walter Willett's name up there. And they wanted to examine the association of low-carbohydrate diets with mortality, and they had 26 years of follow-up in women and 20 years in men. So it was a prospective cohort study. I'm just going to jump to the end here. They had 85,000 people involved, and they documented 12,555 deaths in women and 8,700 deaths in men. There were more women than men in the study. That's why the imbalance there. And what did they find? Well, if you're on a low-carbohydrate diet on animal sources, there's a higher all-cause mortality. If you're on a low-carbohydrate diet and it's a plant-based one, it's a lower risk. So maybe this whole thing about telling you what percent calories from fat that we've been telling you, maybe that's not right. I don't know for sure yet. But when you think about what Ornish and Esselstyn have done, they put people on with a very low-fat diet, right? 10% calories from fat, but they also took away all their animal products. So which was it? Was it the fact that it was low-fat, or is it because there's just no animal products? So for now, I basically tell people, look, follow what Campbell says, which is a whole food plant-based diet, which is going to give you 10 to 12% of your calories from fat anyway. Because you're only taking the minimal nuts and some avocados, but no added oils. But we're not sure where that's going to go. And this is also the study he mentioned. Oh, you asked about limitations. So I've circled down there, attrition at 2 years was high. These are people on a low-carbohydrate diet versus a low-fat diet. So in other words, it's really hard to get people to stay on any of these programs. This is I haven't shown you this study yet, but that's just to show you how hard it is to get people on stay in these programs. So successful weight loss can be achieved with either a low-fat or low-carbohydrate diet, right? They both work for just losing weight. But in terms of mortality, as we've looked at and seen in the Harvard study, clearly the animal-based one, the plant-based one works better. And also, what is low-fat? Because in this study, what did they define as low-fat? They defined it as less than or equal to 30% calories from fat. Well, that's not that different from what Americans are on anyway, right? In fact, one of Gary Taubes' argument saying this doesn't work is if you look at these studies, that low-fat diet didn't work, like low-fat diet didn't help with breast cancer in the Harvard nurses study, it's because the definition of low-fat was 30%. It wasn't 10 or 15%. It was 30%. So does that really count? This is the Eco-Atkins diet that Michael Greger talked about in that video. And again, so the Eco-Atkins, remember they took basically, it was like Atkins, except that it was all based on plants. And the conclusion was a low-carbohydrate plant-based diet has lipid-lowering advantages over a high-carbohydrate, low-fat weight loss diet and improving heart disease risk factors, not seen with conventional low-fat diets with animal products. So maybe the Atkins diet works if you just use plant food. And there actually is, the latest Atkins book actually has a vegan version. So if anybody wants to perform a controlled experiment, let me know. I'd be interested to hear what happens. I don't recommend it, but maybe it'll work. I don't know. So we all know Neil Barnard. He's one of our heroes. Don't worry, there's no music with this one. There might be later, though. You never know, in case you're falling asleep. He has this PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. They've been doing this 21-day Kickstart now for quite a while. It's been, I think, a couple of years now. Has anyone done the 21-day Kickstart here? I did it. I mean, I was already on the diet, but I signed up for it anyway because I wanted to see what would happen. And basically you get a phone call every day from a celebrity. They leave a message on your phone. I think it's a recording. And they've now generalized this to, there's one going on in India and in China, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Yeah. So we've got a little video about the 21-day Kickstart, which I'm going to start now.
Before I started the vegan diet, I was tired all the time. I'm a school teacher. I couldn't wait to get home and take a nap. I followed a really strict diet. I had to measure everything, weigh everything. I even had to count the number of grapes I would eat because my sugar had to be balanced. When I went to see the doctor in January, they prescribed cholesterol medication. They prescribed more diabetes medication. And I had just started the vegan diet. I was about a week into it. I went in, did my 3-month checkup, and they thought that the medication was working. My cholesterol was down. I thought, oh, the medication is working. I told them, I said, you know what? I never took it. I bought it, but the containers are still in my house unopened. This was just the vegan diet. That was when my life turned around, made a 180 as far as diabetes is concerned. At first, I did it consciously. I said, I'm not going to exercise for the first 3 months. I want to see what change the diet would do in my health. And after, I would say about a week or two, I started noticing that I'm smiling more, my attitude is different, I'm walking around the classroom, I'm not tired. My weight went down about 25 pounds, I lost 25 pounds. If you maintain, the vegan diet, you won't need medication. And now I'm the cook. Like, I'm the one preparing the meals because they're so easy and fast and delicious, really good.
So that's pretty empowering, right? When somebody gets to take control of their life like that. So I'm going to go through this, we do this almost every time, right? We review the recommendations. So no animal products, low fat. What does that mean? Well, 10 to 20% calories from fat. It's arguable in the absence of coronary artery disease. The studies were done by Ornish and Esselstyn. They really worked. I mean, those patients got better. We're not 100% sure why they got better. We think it's from the low fat and the lack of animal products, but if we're trying to be reductionist about it, we want to find out which one of those factors really counted. But maybe it's just the whole diet, and that's kind of what we're telling you here. Is we don't really know, and it's maybe not worth even worrying about. Important to avoid replacing fat with fast carbs, meaning junk food, so white rice, white flour products. It's okay to eat bread, but it should be whole wheat. If you're going to eat wheat, it should be whole wheat, grains, whole grains. Minimal added oils. I don't think that's arguable at all. If you're going to get fat in your diet, it should be from whole foods, nuts, seeds, avocados. That's where you should be getting your oils or your fats. And tons of green leafy vegetables. I mean, just think of what a great luxury it is. We have these stores now. I mean, Wegmans, you walk into the produce department any time of the year, and it's just filled with great vegetables. That should be the first thing you eat when you sit down at a meal, is lots and lots of greens. kale, collards, you can name them. All these guys. All these cabbages, greens, spinach, dark green lettuce, not iceberg. We'll go through the other recommendations. Modest nut intake we think is probably good. Not a whole lot, maybe 30, an ounce, which is what you can hold in the palm of your hand. And make sure they're not prepared with added oils. If you look at, I was actually in the drugstore the other day. I was feeling kind of like I had the munchies, and I wanted to get some nuts. I went through all these cans. They all have added oils except for one. So the cottonseed oil, peanut oil. You really have to cook peanuts in peanut oil? Avoid things that come in a package. Also avoid going food shopping when you're hungry, which is what I was doing. And then don't worry about protein. You're going to get, if you're eating whole foods, you're going to get plenty. And remember the power plate, right? You should be eating something from each one of those quadrants each time. And that includes legumes, so you should have some beans every day. Because beans have lots of great things in them, including certain amino acids. I know we tell you not to combine, but there's some amino acids that you don't have to worry about combining. There's some amino acids in beans that are more plentiful in beans than in grains, that type of thing. And what about the supplements? Don't forget the B12. You've got to get B12. It's really easy to get it. You don't have to actually even read that. I'm going to tell you the rules, but if you're just taking like a B12 pill a couple times a week, it's a really big one once a month, or a daily multivitamin. But again, we don't really recommend multivitamins. But if you're taking a multivitamin anyway, you're going to be getting B12. Or you can get B12 fortified foods. And don't worry about taking too much. You really can't get too much. Vitamin D, 2,000 units really every day, unless you're getting plenty of sunshine, which most of us don't get. And then, sort of another controversial area, we definitely recommend the 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed every day, or some equivalent to that, chia seeds, or something else that's like that. That's a whole food, right? It's not, we don't recommend flaxseed oil, but the whole food flaxseed, and it's got to be ground to a powder, otherwise you can't absorb it. But what about the DHA? Well, again, we go back and forth about this. So that's not a whole food. That's extracted from algae, and it's kind of a higher level omega-3 fatty acid. It's what your body is supposed to make when you take in omega-3 fatty acids, is DHA and EPA. Well, there's some argument about whether your body's really good at that. The recommendation is if you're pregnant, you should definitely be taking that, because it's just kind of a guarantee that your fetus is going to get enough of that stuff. But it's not clear that adults really need to worry about that. However, it also is kind of anti-inflammatory. So at this conference I was at in Florida, people were talking about that as just, you should take it for the anti-inflammatory properties, just because it's going to make your joints feel better. So you might experiment with it. See if it takes some and see if it helps you. I don't think it's going to hurt. I don't like to recommend supplements just because you get into that whole mindset of, well, I'm going to take a supplement for this or for that, and it just kind of feeds into that whole big industry. And like I said, that's debatable. So, you've seen this before, but what's the bottom line? Just eat a whole foods vegan diet with tons of greens and minimal added oils, and then go outside and run around. So here's an article from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, changing eating habits for the medical profession. This was September 2012. So health professionals spend a great deal of time at meetings. Grand rounds, noon seminars, research meetings, and medical conferences are part of the life of a health professional. At many of these activities, food is available. Although some members of the health professional community have called for changes to the food environment in the community in which they live, they have paid less attention to the quality of food served at hospitals, physicians' offices, and at conferences. Today at work, one of my associates brought in donuts for all the staff. We went to Dunkin' Donuts and got boxes and boxes. Are you trying to give these people diabetes? What's going on? Because it is good for business. And cookies. Someone else brought in all these cookies. So basically the break room in these places is just always filled with bad food, which is good for business. For example, this is going back to this article, a typical lunch served at a new medical conference consists of a turkey sandwich, a bag of chips, a cookie, and a 12-ounce sugary beverage. This meal of 1,280 calories is double what most adults require and contains virtually no vegetables. Suppose the hospital or the funder of a conference required that only certified healthy meals could be served at lunch meetings. A new meal may consist of a vegetable and hummus sandwich on whole wheat bread, a small piece of dark chocolate, and unsweetened iced tea, equaling approximately 700 calories and containing a few servings of vegetables. So the conclusion is the medical profession was influential in reducing smoking in the United States. It has the capacity to encourage food system change within its own institutions. This would likely reduce caloric consumption of health professionals promote the health of physicians and could also cause a ripple effect in local food economies. So what they're saying is, you know, you're not going to listen to your doctor who tells you to quit smoking if he's still smoking, right? So really, it's got to be the doctors that change first. I really believe that. I mean, obviously, some of us are going to change too, but really, it really is going to be hard for doctors to convince their patients to go on a whole food plant-based diet if they don't buy into it. The Unity Hospital. Have I run into changes?
Yeah, do people listen to you?
Well, I'm surprising. There's a nurse who works in my department who asked for consultation only yesterday, actually, because she wants to avoid a hysterectomy, and she wants to talk to me about because you know hysterectomies for example, dairy foods have a lot to do with a lot of things that go on, fibroids and endometriosis, that type of thing. So she was really interested in trying it. A lot of people, they don't want surgery, but they've never heard there was an option, right? Now that's kind of nice because that's not cancer, right? I have a much harder time if somebody comes to me and says they have cancer, can we treat that with diet? And fortunately, no one's asked me that one yet. But they're kind of, 2 years? Excellent, excellent. Well, we'll talk about the Q&A, okay? I'd like to hear more about that. So who said this? I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens. Very good. Woody Allen, we got a right answer here. Excellent, excellent. Good job. Yeah, you get the prize. You get to go first. The snacks. And I told you this one before. Do you remember who said this? A clever person solves a problem, a wise person avoids it. Einstein, that's right. What's the problem though? There's lots of money to be made in solving problems, not in avoiding them. That's the big problem. We got to work on that one. And now it's time for food. It is before, not even 8 o'clock yet. So it's time for Carol to go on here. Yes, you want the microphone? Come on, yeah, it's pretty loud here.
Can you hear me? Does that work? Okay. Good evening. Tonight I made for you 2 bean and rice dishes. I made you gumbo with red beans and rice, and I made you a Middle Eastern lentils and rice dish with a special salad. There aren't any issues with allergens. I did put tofurkey sausage in the gumbo, and that has wheat and soy in it, but I made a special batch that doesn't have any tofurkey sausage. So that it hasn't been ladled out yet, so if you want to avoid that tofurkey sausage, take a plate that just has the lentils and then serve yourself your own gumbo that's free of that.
Why would you avoid the tofurkey sausage?
Some people are wheat free.
So it's okay.
And some people are wheat free and some people don't like using processed soy products, but I did want to say that tofurkey sausage and tofurkey products generally are pretty mildly processed. I wanted to read you the ingredient list for tofurkey sausage, which looks like this. It has in it vital wheat gluten, which is really just whole wheat flour with the starch washed away. Organic tofu, which is non-GMO if it's organic. Water, expeller-pressed non-GMO canola oil, onions, soy sauce made from non-GMO soybeans, wheat flour, granulated garlic, sea salt, garlic puree, spices, paprika, organic cane sugar, and mustard seed. So, you know, as meat substitutes go, it's not too bad. I also have a little handout for each of you. Anyone who wants to take with you, unfortunately the coupon in it is expired. But it gives you a lot of information and pictures of these tofurkey products, so you know you'll be able to recognize them in the store. The lentil and rice dish, I think, is really special for something that is so very simple. It's interesting. It's supposed to be served with the salad on top of the lentils and rice, as if you had like a Mexican taco or tostada and served it with the salad in it. So that's the way it's served. And having said that, enjoy.
Great. So we'll meet back in about 8:20. Okay. So what do you think about the food? A little round of applause for Carol. So what are we going to talk about now? I don't know until my slide comes up. Oh, so we're going to talk about different patterns of obesity. I thought you'd be interested in this because I'm a radiologist. I get to see this stuff all day long, right? So it turns out that men and women get their fat in different ways. So there's a small person inside. So the fat is the black stuff on the outside there, and inside that is the white things are the ribs, and then most of that big gray area is the liver. And then there's the spleen over on the right-hand side of your screen. Does everyone follow that? And the spine is in the back. That white thing in the back is the spine. But this is quite a large person, but there's really a small person inside that large person, right? Inside. So that's female pattern obesity. What does male pattern obesity look like? So this is a slightly different area of the body, but it's pretty close. You can see there's the liver on the left and the spleen on the right. And if you look outside the ribs, there's hardly any of that black stuff, hardly any fat. The fat's all on the inside. So men tend to get their fat underneath the muscle there, which is why they kind of get the beer belly, right? And then this is what a thin person would look like at the bottom. That's a slightly lower level because there's two things next to the spine and the kidneys. But there's the liver on the left. It's below the level of the spleen. But you can see there's really no black stuff on the inside. There's really no fat on the inside or really on the outside. There's a nice thin layer of fat on the outside. That's normal. And if you compare, sort of that's ideal at the bottom, obese man on the left and obese female on the right. I always find that quite remarkable. And which pattern is more dangerous? So the male pattern is more dangerous. That's fat around the organs. That's what you really have to worry about. And there are some women who have that pattern, right? And they are at a higher risk for getting heart disease and other things associated with metabolic syndrome. So I'm going to show you a little video here. Let's see here.
It's their dirty little secret. Members of Congress taking PAC money from corporations producing bacon, burgers, and other fatty foods. In turn, Congress buys up millions of dollars of these products and dumps them on our schools. Companies get rich, kids get fat. Is your senator on the gravy train? Find out at stopchildhoodobesitynow.org.
I showed you this slide last time. This is a slide I got from that conference I was at in Florida. And again, it shows that the U.S., the blue bars are how life expectancy. So Japan is on the number one in life expectancy, where they consume basically no dairy, right? And U.S. is 27th. But look, the red line is how much we spend per capita, per person, for health. And the United States spends more than twice as much as any other country per capita. So, and what do we argue about? The big arguments are always about who's going to pay. That's what all this stuff about Obamacare and everything. It's about who's paying. Well, really, that's the wrong question. The real question should be, why does it cost so much? So this is actually a real article from the British Journal of Medicine, the BJ. Did I say it right? Yeah. Anyway, parachute used to prevent death and major trauma related to gravitational challenge. Systematic review of randomized controlled trials. You think that's not real, don't you? It actually was published, and there are the parachutes. Okay. This is from the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, 2003. Parachute used to prevent death and major trauma related to gravitational challenge. Systematic review of randomized controlled trials. That's a great question. So this was a study looking at other studies, right? Conclusions. As with many interventions intended to prevent ill health, the effectiveness of parachutes has not been subjected to rigorous evaluation by using randomized controlled trials. In fact, I'm going to go back for a second. If you look at, see where it says results? We were unable to identify any randomized controlled trials of parachute intervention. And there's the conclusion. Advocates of evidence-based medicine have criticized the adoption of interventions evaluated by using only observational data. We think that everyone might benefit if the most radical protagonists of evidence-based medicine organized and participated in a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled crossover trial of the parachute. Some things are just obvious, right? And you're not going to get anybody in the control group, nor should you.
Is that a real study or is that just a mock?
No, they really did it. It's really published. It's the British Medical Journal. You can look it up. I mean, obviously, what they did was they searched their data sources. See, it says Medline, Web of Science. So what they did was they looked for studies. It was a meta-analysis, right? And you look for other studies, but there weren't any. So I'm sure they didn't expect to find any. So it's from the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Cambridge University. So look, we spend $975 billion, close to $1 trillion every year on preventable disease, 90% of disease is preventable, but only 10% of our healthcare dollars are spent on prevention. So this is sort of the wow part of the lecture. I'm just sort of throwing these facts at you. What's different between now and 1900? Well, sugar, in 1900 people ate 5 pounds a year. Now we eat 190 pounds a year. Oils and fats, 4 pounds a year in 1900. Now it's 74 pounds. Cheese, 2 pounds a year. That's huge. Look at that. Cheese went up 15 times, 30 pounds a year. Meat, 140 pounds to 210 pounds. Homegrown vegetables went way down from 131 pounds per year to 11 pounds. Calories went up from 2,100 to 2,757. Soft drinks went from 0 to 53 gallons. And TV went from 0 to 4 hours a day. Now the thing is, I know most of the people in this room are not actually on that right-hand column. That means if this is an average, right, there's some people watching 8 hours or 12 hours of television a day and eating, 300 pounds of sugar or whatever it is. So, what's that?
Once you get a printout of that.
You got a printout?
Yeah, that's what I want.
If you guys want any of those slides, just send me an email. It's pretty easy for me to extract that as a PDF and just I can email it back to you. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. So I've got some interesting questions that were raised by some of our students, and I'm going to throw them at you really quickly. So regarding the Esselstyn study, what legitimate criticism has been raised about it? Are there any serious limitations all of us should be aware of? It's a great question. We should know about that. Is there unbiased, this is again about Esselstyn, unbiased debate about benefits of no oil in the study? Has the study been replicated or some attempt close to it? And has any physician or dietitian published a simple case study? Yeah, we have that for lipid profiles before similar diet, 1 to 3 months into the diet. So these are really important questions, and they're not really being done, right? But on the other hand, we know it's like parachutes, right? We saw what happened when Esselstyn did it. He took 12 really sick people who were having all these events up to that point, and they stopped having events when they took it, when they changed their lifestyle. So how much more information do we need? Wow, I guess to change 350 million people, we need a little more than that. But you would think we could get that kind of research going, and it should, and on an urgent basis. What about the no oil in the study? Again, feel free to do the study. He did the study, and that's how he did it. We don't know which part of it is really necessary. Maybe it's the whole thing. Maybe we could be reductionist about it and extract certain parts and say, well, which can we let go, which is really important. And what about hypertension in the plant-based diet? We know that when we put people on a plant-based diet, that their blood pressure does drop. Is that because they're just getting less sodium? It turns out there's actually something about just animal products that raise your blood pressure. I'm not exactly clear what it is. It may be some of the amino acids that are in there, but it isn't. Lowering sodium can help with your high blood pressure, but also going on a low-fat plant-based diet. Actually, going on a fast will also lower your blood pressure. So that's pretty interesting. So that's kind of the physiology. This is a question about omega-3 fatty acids from algae. So we're going to take questions for about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to finish the talk, and then we'll do more questions. But so are some brands superior? It turns out that pretty much all the omega-3 fatty acids, all the EPA, DHA, comes from the same company. I checked with Michael Greger on that. They then sell it to different groups that put it in their own capsules. So if you think you need to be on DHA/EPA, it may or may not be a good idea. I'm not 100% convinced one way or the other. And my bias away from supplements. But if you're told you have to be on fish oil by your doctor and you want to follow your doctor's instructions, this is the vegan version of fish oil. It's biologically equivalent, and it doesn't have any of the contaminants that you might get with fish, mercury, PCBs. So the latest thinking at this conference that I was at in Florida, what were they saying? A fair number of doctors who practice lifestyle medicine do have their patients on EPA/DHA capsules. For their anti-inflammatory properties is one of the reasons that is given. So I think what you could argue is buy a bottle of it, and if you've got some joint aches, don't change anything except for that. See what happens when you take it for a while. If you take it for a week and you find your joints feel better, that's pretty good evidence. I don't think it's harmful, but yes, question?
I'm taking this grapeseed oil from the
Sorry, grapeseed oil?
Yeah, no, that's a 6, right?
Omega-6?
Yeah, a lot of them are going to have inflammatory.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, this one, well, and then the primrose oil is a 6 So does it, some of the sixes break down into something that helps with inflammation?
You know, I'm not really sure what the specific properties of those oils are. The idea basically, the overall concept is that omega-6s are inflammatory, pro-inflammatory, omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. There are essential fats in both of those groups. There are essential omega-6s and essential omega-3s that we need, but we don't have to worry about the omega-6s in our diet because they're so common. They're essential, but they're not rare, so you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
And if you're eating processed food, they're even more common because a lot of the vegetable oils have tremendous amounts of that. So as far as those two oils, we mentioned primrose oil and grapeseed oil.
Yeah.
I don't really have an answer for that. And therefore it can't be important. No, wait.
No,
You know what Steve Martin says, right?
It's supposed to help with cholesterol, it's supposed to help with, if you have diabetes, it's supposed to help with blood sugar, joint pain, hypertension. I said, what is, it sounds like.
So that's what it says on the bottom?
It's all on the bottom.
Yeah. So I'd be pretty careful. I would look for another source beside, these health food stores, really, they sell organic fruits and veggies, right? But how do they really make their money? They make their money on supplements, a lot of them. So you have to be really careful, and they're all like experts on these things. And so that's how they make their living. You need to find a sort of an unbiased source of information for that. Yes?
Yeah, going back to the SLC diet,
Right.
the information from that is very exciting and amazing.
Right.
To me, it's puzzling that there haven't been any case series, at least that I'm aware of, where they take, a doctor or a dietitian or a group just takes people who have elevated lipid profiles, go on something like the SLC diet or something maybe not quite as no oil as that, but a more doable diet, and they test the lipids a month, 2-3 months later, and just publish it as, because I remember in your first course you asked,
Can people in the back hear the question? I can give you the microphone.
I'll turn around.
No, I'll give you the microphone here.
My question is, this SLC study is very exciting and I think has profound implications. The way to convince people, I think, is to have the opportunity to review a case series, meaning, let's say 50, 100 patients who have heart disease, have elevated cholesterol, LDLs, and you get a baseline, go on, plant-based diet of some kind, check it a month later, 2 months later, and see if the numbers go down, because that's what the SLC diet suggests, and what you've talked about here is, the lipids will probably go down. So my question is, why has anyone done this and published it? No, but beyond orange.
Yeah, orange, right. Orange and SLC have both done that, basically.
Yeah,
but Neil Barner,
but a larger number.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
It's easy to do. It's not a lot of money. You can do it in a clinical setting.
Because I think some of the success of SLC is the diet was followed.
The diet was followed, yeah.
Right.
So
I'm just trying to get motivated to venture vegetarian. That it isn't easy. Right. And if you just hand out a vegetarian diet to these people who come in following angioplasty, I would bet, I have good odds that your adherence to it without a lot of prodding and encouragement will be very low. And hence you'll see no significant or minimal difference or fuzzy because it wasn't full.
Yeah, but would there be a way to do this study, follow up in some way with, a nurse, a dietitian, check the blood tests a month later, and see if things go down?
Right.
To me, that would not be expensive. That would not be impossible to do. You're not asking to, do this for 20 years. You're talking about 1 to 3 months with, the patients being honest about whether they're following this. And my question is anyone done that with a larger number than Ornish and SLC did? And if they have not done that, why have they not done that? because it would be much more convincing to, you know, you pull up a case study of 100 patients and you look at their lipids before and after, and you pull the data and you actually have numbers where, you know, these values go way down. You know, to me, that has huge public health implications.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And it's preventative, and I don't think it's prohibitive in terms of study design and, you know, doing it. It seems simple.
Let's form a committee.
Well, why hasn't it been done?
That's what you wanted to do with this course.
Yeah, actually, I did.
Yeah.
I'll get to it in a second. Actually, when we first started doing this course, that was my goal, actually, was to get people to give me their personal information, which we did. We collected it the first time. It really didn't, most people didn't really want to cooperate with that, and I didn't really have the time. So, but yeah, we could do it again. I mean, next time we give the course, we could try doing that. The big thing is most people are going to have to act as their own controls, right? Nobody really wants to be in the control group. So you kind of have to, which you can do. You can say, well, what were your measured numbers before? Yeah. The idea was to get your numbers drawn first. Go get your blood drawn before you start, and then see what happens. So you had a point you wanted to make. Yeah, you had a point you wanted to make. Are there some nutritionists in here who can? Who are dietitians? Yeah, there are a few that I know of, dietitians in the area that can help with this. Joy Valvano at Unity. Right. All right, so this is a diversion. We're going to come back to Q&A at the end again. And now I'm going to skip through parts of my talk now because we're running behind, which is good. So I'm just going to tell you what these laws are. I'm not going to discuss them. I have 2 laws. I also have medical rules, like rule number 7 is never remove a drainage tube on Friday, but that's different from this. Okay. So Barnett's first law is expensive solutions will be more widely known than cheap solutions, even if they're not nearly as good. And that kind of gets into the politics of what this is all about. And I'm going to skip through that really quickly. And then my second law, we'll talk about it next week. Nobody gets credit for bad things that don't happen, which is why nobody's really interested in prevention. You can't really prove that you prevented a terrible thing from happening, because who said you were going to have it happen anyway? So like if on 9/11, if the FBI had figured out the plot and the airline hadn't flown into the World Trade Center, we wouldn't all be sitting around 10 years later saying, wow, we really dodged that bullet. We wouldn't know about it, right? But you're a hero if you can, save somebody once they're obviously in trouble. And I don't mean that in a bad way. That's kind of human nature, and it makes sense. Why would you pay anybody to tell you to, be careful? And I'm going to skip through this too. Let's see. We were just talking about social situations and in this part of the talk, and I'm going to skip this. I'm going to go right to slide 65. So let's see here. Okay. There might be noise here. I apologize if it's really loud.
So what would you say about this?
Remember I told you this is a hotbed, this Western New York, Ithaca, Rochester? She's actually from Rochester, trained in Rochester. She's not originally from Rochester, but she went to U of R. Anyway, these are the books that she's written. The Sexual Politics of Meat, and she's really quite fascinating. She talks about so it's a feminist vegetarian critical theory about how when people talk about, when they're advertising meat, they often will use sort of sexual images. And she's got this other book called The Pornography of Meat. I mean, these are real books, these are real images from advertising. And then she has another book called Living Among Meat Eaters. So really recommend those if you're trying to figure out how to do this socially. And you have to. If you're going to switch to a plant-based vegan diet, you're going to have to face these social situations. So she graduated from the U of R. She went to Yale Divinity School. She's worked locally, and now she lives in Texas. And why did she become vegetarian? So she recalls hearing of the death of her family pony in a hunting accident while at Yale, and then eating a hamburger that night. she concluded that it was hypocritical for her to mourn the death of her pony and have no problem eating a slaughtered cow. And she became a vegetarian that night. So she's pretty interesting. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, take a look at Carol Adams' books. Tribe of Heart, they're in Ithaca. They make documentaries, and this is who they are. It's what are their names? Oh, Jenny Stein and James Levesque. The first big time one they made was called The Witness, and it's about a guy who becomes horrified at the fur industry, and actually he's this kind of hardened hard hat from Brooklyn. He's a builder, and he just becomes horrified, and he puts together this van. That's what's in the background there, a van that then drives around with images of the fur industry. And their latest movie is called Peaceable Kingdom: The Journey Home, which is really wonderful. That a lot of that has to do with Farm Sanctuary, which is down in Watkins Glen.
It's free online.
And that's free online now? Okay, yeah, Peaceable Kingdom. Really, really nice. That guy there, Harold Brown, is the farmer sitting next to the cow. He also lives down there.
It's a nice introductory one, too, without being too graphic.
It's a good introductory one without being too graphic, is what we've been told, yeah.
That's what got me to go vegetarian.
So you got you to go vegetarian with Peaceable Kingdom. So if you don't want to become vegetarian, don't watch this, because it might turn you into a vegetarian. So that's Tribe of Heart. So just remember, all great truths begin as blasphemies, right? So someday we're going to say, yeah, what's the big deal? But right now, we're still in the blasphemic stage. Gene Bauer is another vegan hero. He is with Farm Sanctuary down in Watkins Glen, and he and his wife at the time, Lori Houston, they merged their names for a while and were known as Gene and Lori Bouston, but now they're divorced. So he's back to being Gene Bauer. And she went to California and opened up her own Farm Sanctuary. But they originally were funded by sales of vegetarian hot dogs at Grateful Dead concerts. And the Volkswagen they used, it's this little VW bus, it's still down there at Farm Sanctuary. The one doesn't move anymore, but you can look at it. And the first animal they rescued was a sheep named Hilda, who was rescued from a pile of dead animals behind a stockyard, and she turned out to be alive. So those are images of Farm Sanctuary. That's really how it looks up there on the right. Has anyone been down there, Farm Sanctuary? Yeah, it's really fun to take a trip down there, especially if you have kids or grandchildren. You get to go in the pig barn and scratch the pigs. They love humans. They're not dangerous. They just, yeah. There's somebody scratching a pig. In Farm Sanctuary. So this is about a 12-minute video.
People everywhere are making choices more connected with their values. We are simplifying our lives, buying less, and living more because we know that the earth supplies enough for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. We recycle because we know the earth's resources are limited and that we must share those resources with those yet to come. We buy fair labor and fair trade goods in order to, well, be fair. We buy organic to keep chemicals off the land and out of our water, to protect wildlife, to keep farm workers and their children safe, and to keep our bodies healthy. We conserve water, save energy, and plug into the power of Mother Nature because we realize that when we make connected choices, we not only build better lives for ourselves, we build a better world for everyone. Still, there is one connected choice that often gets overlooked. It's one of the most far-reaching personal, practical, and ethical choices you can make. With this choice, we can help feed ourselves and every hungry person on the planet, end deforestation, replenish the deep woods of the north and save our disappearing rainforests, revitalize our rural landscapes and save family farms, stop the #1 polluter of water and and the #1 waster of water. Return our oceans to thriving underwater worlds teeming with life and wonder. Make cancer and heart disease a rarity instead of a common occurrence. And return wild lands to their rightful owners. This powerful choice can be done by everyone, every day, by you, right now, with this. We are all connected. The choices we make affect not only our lives, but the lives of other people. If we use more than our share, we are taking from other people and from those yet to come. In this day and age, in a world of plenty, it is difficult to understand how, all over the world, nearly 1 billion people are going hungry, and 40,000 will starve to death every single day. This doesn't happen because there isn't enough for everyone. This happens because, while people are starving, we are wasting enormous amounts of grain to feed cows, pigs, chickens, and other animals so that we may satisfy our desire for meat, milk, and eggs. The earth can provide only so much food. While the human population is growing and growing, the tiny amount of land on which we can grow food is not. Because raising animals for food takes so much land, water, and other resources, the Earth would be able to sustain only about 2 billion people on a meat and dairy-based diet. With a world population of nearly 7 billion people, it's easy to see that we need to find a better way. Vegan choices support a world where all may be fed. Vegan choices require only a fraction of the land and far fewer resources than what is needed to produce animal products. The equation is simple. The fewer animal products we consume, the more people we can feed. If we ignore this simple fact, more and more people will be going hungry as the world population continues to grow. Vegan choices also promote your own health and the health of others. The #1 killers in the United States, heart disease and cancer, are conclusively linked to consuming animal products. Vegan choices work to make these diseases a rarity and refuse to contribute to their escalating spread around the world as animal-based diets are pushed on other countries and upon the poor. Millions of people, instead of supporting the export of disease and hunger, are taking personal responsibility. They are being the change they want to see in the world. Their vegan choices are prolonging and bettering their own lives, easing the burden on the planet, and making a life-sustaining commitment to future generations. Vegan choices conserve land, water, and energy. In fact, raising animals for food consumes so many resources that making vegan choices is one of the most powerful things you can do as an individual to help save the planet. One of the top contributors to global climate change is raising animals for food. That's right. While we're being encouraged to change our light bulbs and drive hybrid automobiles, the United Nations found that raising animals for human consumption contributes to global warming more than all the planes, cars, and trucks on the planet combined. 40% more. To feed and water farmed animals takes enormous amounts of water. To produce just 1 pound of meat requires on average 2,500 gallons of water. A gallon of cow's milk, 750 gallons of water. By simply making vegan choices, you can save over 1.3 million gallons of water every year. That's so much water that being vegan, you could leave your shower on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and still you couldn't waste as much water as someone consuming an animal-based diet. Many of us recycle paper because we want to save trees. But the #1 reason for cutting down trees, including the destruction of the rainforest, is to clear land to grow food for farmed animals. In just 1 year, a vegan saves a full acre of trees, equal to millions of pieces of paper. The billions of animals we raise for food not only use most of our water and eat most of our food, they poop most of it out. In the US, farmed animals produce 130 times more excrement than the entire human population, 86,000 pounds per second. Per second! That's enough to rebuild the Denver skyline every 24 hours out of poop. This concentrated slop pollutes our water, destroys our topsoil, and contaminates our air. We have forgotten that the oceans used to teem with life. Whales and dolphins and sea turtles were common and abundant. Schools of fish were so plentiful the waters would tumble and froth with life. But now, our oceans are dying. Industrial fishing has caused a global decline in fish populations to near extinction in most parts of the ocean. Massive nets, miles long, scrape the ocean depths and indiscriminately scoop up and suffocate everyone in their catch. Turtles, seals, dolphins, whales, and billions of struggling fish. And industrial fish and shrimp farms are creating environmental dead zones. Massive amounts of concentrated waste from these factory farms smother the ocean floor and choke the life from it. But it's not too late. Imagine a world of clean air, clean water, millions upon millions of acres of replanted forests and flourishing grasslands, thriving oceans teeming with life and wonder, and vast expanses of wildlands given back to nature and the wild animals who used to call them home. Vegan choices work so that all of this may one day again be the world we all share. In order to feed hundreds of millions of people animal products, the factory lines have to move fast. Very fast. In the US alone, every year we kill over 10 billion farmed animals and over 17 billion sea animals. We kill over 3 million scared and helpless animals every single hour of every single day. How can it be that 95% of Americans feel it is wrong to unnecessarily hurt and kill helpless animals? Yet 95% of Americans continue to unnecessarily hurt and kill helpless animals so they can eat them. Why the disconnection? It's time to connect. When you make vegan choices, you stand up for the meekest among us, those who rely entirely on your ability to show compassion. You stand up for farmed animals and refuse to pay anyone to harm them on your behalf. You stand up for the millions of wild animals who are displaced and brutally killed to make room for farmed animals and profits. And you help rebuild the wildlands they call home. Most of us have had the opportunity to get to know an animal. When you get to know them, you quickly find out that they each have their own personalities, their own quirks, their own ways. You can tell when they're happy, or sad, or scared. And sometimes we forget that this is true for all animals. And most of us have felt the unconditional love of an animal, that deep bond that seems to go beyond our human connections. We talk to our dogs and to our cats, and sometimes we connect with them more deeply than with anyone else. They love us, and we love them. You can feel that connection again and again by giving your love to every animal, those we call our pets, wild animals, and those who suffer on farms and in factory farms. Make vegan choices to align with your true love for animals. Expand your circle of compassion, and the love will come back to you 1,000 times. Each of our choices in the past helped build the world we live in today. And each of our choices from this moment forward will help build the world of tomorrow. There is a way to build a better world, a world in which we would all like to live, a world driven by the innate goodness of people and their values of justice, kindness, and compassion for other people, for the planet, for the animals. Vegan. Every day you are invited to make choices. Live your values, change the world. It's that simple.
That's it. It's 5 minutes to 9. We did it. So, sure. I have a question. We have 5 minutes. Maybe we can open this up for discussion. So, one of the awkward things that physicians run into is, well, we keep asking this question, is why won't people stick with these diets? We know that that's what they should be doing. But compliance is often really low. What if it turned out that you could get people to become compliant if they did it for these reasons, right? What if they said, if you showed them these videos, now that sort of feels awkward as a physician, right? Making someone see something like this. But what if they watched that and for the rest of their lives, they ate well? Wouldn't that be worth it? So I don't know, just think about it. Anyway.
Can't you play that in your office?
I could. Yeah. They'll say, oh, it's propaganda. Yeah, comment.
One of the problems that Obesity and I are finding is is the lack of support group. You want to lose weight, let's say you go to Weight Watchers. It's a group of people that are going through the same thing.
Right.
There's someone trained, to sort of help you on that way. It would be wonderful if there was a sort of part 2 to this class where maybe there's someone that can demonstrate some cooking that would talk about more in depth some of the recipes.
Somebody over there was saying, a dietitian to come in
Right.
and knock out where you started and bring it
Right.
to the next level.
Well, that's interesting. One of the things I learned about at this conference, I heard a new term. I'm going to get it wrong. It had to do. It's the basically it's like group therapy. There's a term for the where you have like 10 or 12 patients come in for one visit, one session. There's actually a sorry.
A group medical.
Yeah, a group medical appointment. GM, is that it?
I just wrote an article.
GM, you did?
It's in the back page of the most recent medical society.
Oh, really? Okay. I'll have to read that. So, because one of the problems is, one of the reasons that you don't hear about this much from your doctors is because it's not very practical. We have all this training and all this knowledge for taking care of complicated things, but this isn't that complicated, right? Plus, it's hard because there's some knowledge you need, but it's not. It doesn't feel like very medical to those of us who practice medicine. There's no catheters involved. Right? In fact, it's the opposite of that. So that's kind of one of the, if you have a group medical appointment, you can actually have a bunch of people, you can make enough money as a physician to justify that, because you might get paid, $25 to spend an hour with somebody. But if you have 10 people, then you can pay your staff. You can pay your loans. You can pay your loans and put your kids through college and that kind of stuff. So
I don't think it necessarily has to be, excuse me, but I don't think necessarily has to be a doctor.
Well, you're absolutely right.
I think that it can be, paraprofessionals that are knowledgeable and committed to a vegan lifestyle.
And I didn't mean to say that was not the right.
Because like in the medical model, for example, I remember years ago I got referred for weight management over, I think it was just strong, and you had your choice between drinking the drink or following the low-calorie plan. There was group meetings. Somehow the insurance was paying for that, but it wasn't led by a doctor. It was led basically by a nurse and a nutritionist.
Sure.
But I'm even saying take it out of the medical community and just put it in the open marketplace. People are paying, what is it now, for $20 a meeting. And I'm not saying it should necessarily be a for-profit thing, but I think there is a gap in the marketplace that obviously your classes are very successful, you've done it many times, but then people are sort of out there. So it would be great to have some sort of.
Okay. So I think that's a really good suggestion. Support groups. It's a really good suggestion. I do know some dietitians and we can recommend them, but it's obviously I don't have an answer for you immediately. But I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
What about if we had a health coach?
What if we had a health coach?
A vegan coach.
A vegan coach.
You meet privately or you meet in small groups, and they've been walking the talk for a while, and they know how to diet.
Doctors
need to know about this stuff, because patients go to their doctors looking for help and solutions, and most doctors don't know about this.
Right.
Yeah, I give you guys credit, whoever our doctors are. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
For sharing.
Sure. It's challenging.
Okay, what about
Yeah, sure.
the Rochester Area Vegetarian Society? I mean, they have monthly meetings.
Well, yeah, that's true.
It is a support group in a way.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Yeah, we do meet once a month. As, you know, it's not always about food, but it's often about food. And certainly we serve. You know, there's a potluck, and you can feel comfortable that knowing that what you're getting at the potluck is all vegan. It's not always necessarily the most healthy vegan food in the world, but it is all vegan.
Just going to the dinner is an education in itself.
Yeah, right.
Because you see a whole array of things people try, just gives you all kinds of ideas and recipes or see the ingredients lists are out there. So there's a lot of modeling that you can do, just kind of sharing in that meal with those people.
Right.
And then often what the program is about, you know, we've had a lot of nutrition programs that are
True.
so I was thinking that too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because, you know, when you're given this class before, people say, well, what am I going to do now? And it's so sweet to hear that. What do you do, you know, together on Wednesday night, Thursday night, whatever it was? And he said, well, come to the rants meetings.
Right.
Which is an option. Another thing is the idea of the vegan coach is a good one. You know, I know 2 or 3 people who are doing vegan coaching, and also the University of Rochester, for their students, they're having a month-long veg challenge. And they made the effort of trying to find people who are willing to be coaches, and then the kids who sign up for the challenge, they link them all together. So that's kind of a short-term thing, but it's the same concept, so it has a lot of promise.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yes. The question is, are there schools in nutrition where you learn vegan nutrition? Actually, I don't really know the answer to that, but I do know one thing is that a lot more dietitians who are already vegan are going to get their RD. So there are people who have that interest now. I think young people who are interested in food kind of get this, right? They really already know about veganism, and I think they're likely to kind of go into it. So even if the school's not already oriented that way, their students are going to say, hey, what's the story here? So, because, you know, I mean, when we taught medical school, it was about, you know, our version of nutrition was total parenteral nutrition, you know, how to get stuff into an IV, that kind of thing, right? So, yeah. Yes?
How do you copy that?
Copy that video? It's called A Life Connected. And if you just Google it, you can download it for free. Yeah. It's actually, I think it's on video. It's on probably on YouTube also. But if you actually go to their website, you'll get the best copy. So, yes? That could be a omega-3 issue, yes.
Well, because I've done a lot of readings, I'm not sure which source it's came from. But there's comments about the capsules actually are rancid oil, so you don't want to be taking it. What's a healthy source?
Okay, so she's asking, what's a healthy source? Could they have rancid oils? And well, that's the problem. Anytime you extract a nutrient from a food, if you could find a source of omega-3 fatty acids, right, that actually was in the food, I would highly recommend that. So that's why flaxseed is great. It doesn't have the EHA-DPA in it, DHA-DPA in it. However, there's a really common weed you garden called purslane. It's one of the most common weeds on the planet. Purslane is loaded with omega-3 fatty acids. Yeah. As far as getting stuff that isn't rancid, you just have to get, obviously it has to be fresh. I don't really know which products are the best, honestly. It should be, you know, relatively new. And also, if you're vegan, you want the capsule to be vegan, not made out of gel. But there's plenty of them that actually are, like Omega-3. We have that's the last one I bought. You know, we've always got a bottle in our refrigerator. Some weeks I go and take one every day, and some weeks I go. It depends on what I just read. So.
Well, then there's also, I think, evidence that if you're not being overdosed on omega-6, you don't need that much omega-3.
That's another, yeah, the other good point is that you don't necessarily need to worry about omega-3 so much if you're eating lots of greens and not eating a lot of processed food, because you're not getting so much omega-6. Yeah, and it's really kind of a balance.